Well, good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Courtney Shaff, Monitoring and Reporting Program Manager.
Good afternoon, co-chairs, members of the board. My name is Ken Fetcho, and I am OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator and Tribal Liaison.
So this is going to be a fun presentation and really fun to come behind the amazing work of the Clackamas Partnership. This is a modified version of our presentation we gave to the Tracking and Communicating Outcomes Committee a few months ago, and really excited to just spend a little bit of time talking about our monitoring programs today. You will definitely see as we walk through the presentation, those that were at the TAC committee, this is a little heavier on the open solicitation because we are in the middle of that cycle right now, and just wanted to give a little bit of highlights for some of that work. We have definitely carved out time for questions and discussion at the end, so please jot down your questions as we go today. We definitely knew we were following a fit partnership and are not using our entire amount of time, and making sure that there was time for them to speak and engage with you, and time for you to have questions with us. Most of the programs we're going to talk about are lottery funded. Most of our monitoring programs are lottery funded. We do give some Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery funds to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife so that they can do some monitoring. And as you took action earlier today, we do receive some funds from the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission to support IMW monitoring in the John Day. Bruce brought this up earlier today. But essentially, our technical assistance, engagement, and right now, as we're talking about monitoring, needs to be in support of those things in the green box: acquiring from willing landowners interests in land, carrying out projects to protect or restore fish and wildlife, and carrying out projects to, protect or restore natural watershed functions, and to improve water quality or stream flow. So that's really something Ken and I think about a lot. Our review teams think about a lot to make sure that our monitoring is in support of those actions. This is just a really fun, again, Linda created communication tool that we've been using to just talk about how monitoring is really spread out across OWEB's grant programs. So our 25-27 board adopted spending plan breaks our funding down amongst categories. We have monitoring that falls within the open solicitation. We have monitoring in the quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes, and our focus investment FIP effectiveness monitoring. And together, those categories equal $6.1 million, or 4.6% of our spending plan. But we also have monitoring funding distributed throughout our FIPs, just as we heard from the Clackamas Partnership. We have monitoring funding in the SIA program, which is captured in the engagement grants. So really, monitoring is trickled throughout of our spending plan and more than 4.5%. And our monitoring investments are really working to answer big picture questions across the state, from our state and federal partners and local partners. Things like informing NOAA's 5-year status review of salmon, how our CREP projects are doing, and how CREP techs are working with landowners to adjust things before re-enrollment. Do tide gates function as designed and intended after installed? And really for adaptive management in our FIPs, just like we heard from the Clackamas Partnership. This is just a snapshot of how we have invested when some of our different monitoring programs started, the number of grants, and the current amount of investments. And we're going to now spend some time just talking a little bit about each of these different areas and some project examples that fall within each of them. And I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, Courtney. So again, for the record, my name is Ken Fetcho. I am OWEB's Monitoring Coordinator. And I work closely with Courtney and Audrey Hatch, who's also joining us virtually, to help coordinate OWEB's monitoring grant programs. And I also help administer some of the grants that are funded through these different grant programs that you see in the table listed here. And so, as Courtney said, we're going to walk you through some of these different grant programs, how we support monitoring in Oregon. And I'll be starting with Open Solicitation, which is by far the grant program where we fund the majority of our monitoring grants to date. Next slide. The Open Solicitation Monitoring Grant Program is just an example of when we use that term OWEB responsive grant making, where once a year we invite applicants to submit monitoring applications to us to meet their monitoring needs. And the intent of the Open Solicitation Monitoring Grant Program is to provide funding to help our grantees to describe watershed conditions, identify status and trends related to habitat, fish, and wildlife populations, and also sort of document those water quality and water quantity trends and status of those conditions. Funds can also be used to determine if restoration projects are meeting their physical, biological, and ecological objectives. And all that information is meant to feed into the adaptive management cycle by incorporating new knowledge into scoping, designing, and implementing eligible restoration acquisition projects. So OWEB has been funding open solicitation monitoring grants since 1997. We have funded a total of 547 open solicitation monitoring grants. 489 of those have been completed. And when we pulled the data from the OGMIS database, there were 76 open grants that are currently in progress that were awarded through this grant offering. And so this map will be showing you guys a series of these maps for each of the grant programs. So the dark symbols are those that have been completed, and those that are hollow or open are the open grants. And it's just important to note that we're only identifying a single point for each grant that's been awarded, but typically monitors are occurring at several locations in their watershed. And then finally, you'll just see that there's a good distribution. So we're funding monitoring projects, a variety of habitats across the state and across all 6 OWEB regions. Next slide, please. So I'll walk you guys through this slide. So since 2015, over the last 10 years, we have received between 20 to 35 applications per year. And in general, we are able to we have available funds to fund about half of those applications that are submitted. This graph is showing that the total amount requested each cycle varies quite a bit. And in general, we have seen a request in total amount increase from 2019 to 2025, and that's indicated by those bluish green bars. The orange bars are showing the amount of OWEB's funds that we have awarded in monitoring grants each year, and that amount has sort of steadily increased from 2016 to present. This summer, when we received monitoring applications, we received 34 applications that requested $7.2 million. So we can see in that blue bar in 2025, we saw in 1 year a doubling in our request. And this year we have, in this biennium, in 2025 and 2026, we have approximately $2.5 million per year to award monitoring grants. And you will see that there's no orange bar there because these applications are still being reviewed. And in January, next meeting, you guys will award monitoring grants. So we'll have an orange bar then. But one thing you'll notice by the blue line, it's okay. One thing you'll notice by that blue line, and that blue line is just showing the average amount per application. And you can also see that has markedly increased since 2021 as well. And there's, probably a variety of reasons. So Bruce, later on, maybe you want to ask me a question. I can give you some thoughts on that. This next graph describes the who is monitoring for, or who is applying for OWEB's monitoring funds. And again, so in this year, we received 34 applications. Half of those were submitted by watershed councils, and that's a pretty common theme we see where the majority applicant type is our watershed councils each year. And then the next category there, corporation or partnership, that is a broad category for grantee type in our database. And that includes non-governmental organizations such as Trout Unlimited, the Institute for Applied Ecology, and also the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership. They sort of fall in that category. And you'll see that they submitted 9 applications this cycle. SWCD submitted 5, and then there were 3 universities that submitted applications this year. We had one coming from Southern Oregon University, one through Portland State University, and another through Oregon State University. Finally, or one thing to note, is that no tribes applied for monitoring funds through the open solicitation this year. However, tribes are key partners on several applications that were submitted this year, and they have applied for and received monitoring grants through this offering in the past. Finally, 3 of the tribal project development grants that have been awarded this year have proposed monitoring the effects of stream restoration actions intended to benefit salmon and steelhead. And so that just tells me that tribes continue to be strategic on really pursuing specific OWEB grant programs based on their goals and objectives. Next slide. So each year, monitoring applicants are proposing to monitor a broad range of habitats and parameters to better understand their watershed conditions. And so this graph illustrates, what the applicants are proposing to monitor and the corresponding number of applicants that were submitted this year in open solicitation. So this graph just really emphasizes that we are supporting monitoring in a variety of habitats and really sort of this concept of from ridgetop to ridgetop. We can see that the majority of the applications are proposing to monitor water quality and water quantity, and that water quantity includes stream flow and groundwater conditions. And what we've seen repeatedly is that water temperature is the most common parameter that our applicants are proposing to monitor, and that makes sense because a lot of the work they're doing are in support of salmon and steelhead, which is a cold water species that really is impacted by warmer water temperatures. And so this round, though, we did see an uptick in applications that are monitoring in wetlands and upland habitats. And this data that results from all of these projects, as Courtney mentioned, is really helping support local, state, tribal, and federal priorities. So I'm going to hand it back to Courtney.
So the next few slides are gonna give you a quick tour around our state to demonstrate, again, the variety of monitoring that's happening, ridgetop to ridgetop. And just like for open solicitation, where the applications are going region by region, review teams are reviewing them, voting on them, funded, do not fund, and then ranking them within the region. When we switched to the Oregon Plan monitoring team being a statewide team, we didn't want to lose that statewide perspective of monitoring, that ridgetop to ridgetop approach. And so the way Ken and I run the review team is we review the applications by region, discuss them, and rank them within region so that we're ensuring that we're still distributing our monitoring funds across the state and really putting an emphasis on that value of monitoring uplands and forests as well as our coastal communities.
Right, so next slide, please. So I'm going to be showing you guys one example of a monitoring grant that's currently being funded through open solicitation, one per region. But just know that there are several grants in each region, and it's hard to give a representative. There's always all these unique habitats in each region, and so there's just a variety of these projects that are happening. Like we said, there's currently 76 open monitoring grants across the state. And I'll be sharing with you 6. So the first one in Region 1 that I'll be highlighting is a monitoring grant that we provided to the North Coast Watershed Association in 2022 for them to hire a contractor to conduct rapid bioassessment and limiting factors analysis across 332 stream miles throughout the combined watersheds of the Nicanicum Watershed Council and the North Coast Watershed Association. So they're partnering together on this project. This project is wrapping up this year, and they've collected essential data to answer their monitoring questions to really understand where juvenile coho abundance and distribution exists, and also how that overlays with different watershed conditions that may serve as limiting factors for salmonids. And so the goal is to use that information to develop an approach to identify and implement restoration actions that address these limiting factors. Next slide. So some grants that we fund are long-term monitoring or continuations. And so in some cases, applicants have successfully applied for and received funding over several cycles to meet their long-term monitoring needs. So a great example of a long-term monitoring project that builds on previous years of monitoring is the Partnership for Umpqua Rivers, Umpqua Basin Collaborative Monitoring Project that we again funded last year. So PER, as they're known, routinely applies for 2-year status and trend monitoring grants that have allowed them to collect water quality data across the entire Umpqua Basin in a thoughtful and coordinated approach. This monitoring is helping them answer their monitoring questions to understand what the water quality conditions are in this large watershed. This monitoring has been instrumental in really identifying areas of concern to help local partners, including themselves, prioritize streams for restoration, enabling practitioners to make informed decisions and allocate resources effectively. In addition, the data they're collecting is shared with the Department of Environmental Quality and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and that information has informed state decisions to help list impaired water bodies and locate cold water refugia in the Umpqua Basin. Next slide. So the example in Region 3 that I'm going to share is indicative of grants that are submitted to address a local partnership and organization's discrete questions around effectiveness of restoration actions. And so last year, you guys funded the Longtom Watershed Council to implement really sort of a unique, this is the first time we've funded a monitoring project like this that brings together Western scientific and indigenous knowledge to systems to develop a fire effects monitoring framework that will help improve burning strategies in the Willamette Valley with the goals of understanding how prescribed burning is affecting ecological diversity and supporting tribal priorities associated with cultural burning. Next slide. So Region 4, in 2023, the board awarded a monitoring grant to the Fort Rock Silver Lake SWCD to answer their questions to understand how the vegetation responds to efforts that are implemented after the 2020 Bratton Fire. So their monitoring approach is integrating on the ground and remote sensing techniques to monitor at multiple scales to produce relevant and timely information to evaluate the effects of aerial seeding success and compare that to how vegetation comes back naturally where no seeding efforts occurred. This information will inform cost-effective post-fire restoration methods and deliver outreach tools for land management agencies and producers. And as a side note, the restoration actions they're monitoring were funded through OWEB's 2020 Post-Wildfire Recovery Grant Program. So Region 5. We're talking about Grand Ronde Model Watershed again. The example here is another one of those long-term monitoring projects where the grantee, in this case, the Grand Ronde Model Watershed, is seeking OWEB funds every 2 years to operate 12 streamflow gauges in the Grand Ronde and Inaha basins. Grand Ronde Model Watershed has been successful in receiving OWEB funds since 2007, and they are seeking to understand how much water is in their priority streams, and that information is then used to inform future water management and restoration efforts. And this long-term data collection really serves as a foundation for making informed decisions for future projects. Real-time and completed streamflow data sets are available for download on the Oregon Water Resources Department website and are critical for informing management actions commonly implemented in the Grand Ronde Basin. All right, so Region 6. The last example I'm going to share is another effectiveness monitoring project submitted by a local organization to OWEB to answer their monitoring questions. So this grant was awarded to the South Fork John Day Watershed Council in 2021, and it's helping local partners work with leaders in freshwater mussel conservation efforts to build on a larger body of work. They are seeking to understand how well freshwater mussel mitigation measures worked and the impacts of stream restoration actions to freshwater mussels, fish habitat, and to steelhead in Murderers Creek, which is a tributary of the South Fork John Day River. This work is well related to some of the efforts that we learned about last year when the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation presented at an all-staff meeting, where they were really trying to draw our attention to the inadvertent impacts from stream restoration to freshwater mussels. And so information from this project will be shared to help inform future best management practices for restoration planning and implementation to minimize those impacts to freshwater mussels. All right. So I'm going to just take a breath here. A lot's going on, right? So another way OWEB supports monitoring in Oregon is through our programmatic effectiveness monitoring grants, which are funded under the Quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes line item that Russ loves so much. So the intent of the OWEB grant of the Effectiveness Monitoring Grant Program is to evaluate the outcomes at a broader landscape scale to describe the impacts from our restoration investments. And these programmatic effectiveness monitoring grants are developed in close coordination with the grantees, and they are just funded less frequently than the ones in Open Solicitation. You can see here, there's just less dots on the map. But we have been funding monitoring through this also since 1997. And there's been a total of 103 grants awarded so far, and there are 5 that are open or in progress. And so, the next slide, please. So the example I'm going to share, and again, there's tons of examples. A lot of the efforts that we've been funding are available on an OWEB effectiveness monitoring webpage that we have that shares information. We have other ones, but I just thought I'd choose Tide Gates to share with you today to kind of show you guys how a small investment in this has spawned future efforts. So in 2016, the then OWEB's board monitoring subcommittee and staff identified Tidegate restoration investments as a priority area to investigate. And so shortly thereafter, we worked closely and provided funding with the Institute for Natural Resources at Oregon State University to perform a literature review to help better just organize the collective lessons learned from Tidegate restoration projects. This effort produced a comprehensive report. It was wrapped up in 2018, and that described the effects of Tidegate restoration projects that was in existing literature. And then we also pulled information from everything that OWEB had funded through restoration and monitoring. So they pulled all these collective lessons learned and findings and with what was ever in the published literature and combine that into a 447 page comprehensive report. And then in 2021, Jillian McCarthy and I, who at one point was helping coordinate the Tidegate partnership, we took that 447 pages and slimmed it down to 18 pages. And the idea was create this bulletin that's intended for a technical audience to really have those take-home messages distilled down in sort of this technical bulletin that's still available on our website and is of use to restoration practitioners. And then finally, in 2024, with a targeted OWEB grant to the Coquille Watershed Association, the Nature Conservancy, and the Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, they developed a Tidegate and tidal wetland monitoring handbook. And this project was inspired by that 2018 report that recognized the need for a standardized set of Tidegate monitoring protocols, so information sort of could be rolled up if we wanted to, if it was collected consistently across the coast. So now, almost 10 years later, there are several Tidegate restoration and effectiveness monitoring grants that are being funded through a variety of grant programs along the Oregon coast. And it's just a really great example of how programmatic effectiveness monitoring has elevated our understanding of restoration investments, can spawn several important guidance documents for restoration and monitoring, and then continue to collect vital data by integrating other OWEB monitoring grant opportunities. And so I think I can do that. There's one last grant program that I'll describe. The way that OWEB also supports responsive grant making is through the Focus Investment Partnership. So individual monitoring projects can also be funded in each FIP initiative in a board-identified ecological priority, along with restoration, technical assistance, engagement, and acquisition projects. And the monitoring grants that each initiative pursues is really intended for them to help identify status and trends and effective restoration actions to inform future work. And so again, we can see from this grant that we have funded 85 monitoring grants through this FIP program. 53 have been completed and 32 monitoring grants are in progress. So one example that I'll be brief is funded through the Baker LIT, or Local Implementation Focused Investment Partnership. They were in cohort 2, and they just really embraced these monitoring funds to help improve their monitoring techniques and to develop some data storage and analytical tools. And it's really helping them identify both their implementation actions and their monitoring data that's been sort of integrated into a database to help them inform their efforts, but also can help them identify sort of the collaborative effects of their actions on public and private lands. So with that, I will turn it over to Courtney.
So we're going to touch briefly on just a couple of the other areas within the spending plan where we also have monitoring going on. And one is through the strategic implementation area monitoring. Strategic implementation areas are a collaborative grant program between Oregon Department of Ag and OWEB, where Oregon Department of Ag identifies these strategic implementation areas, normally managed by a soil and water conservation district. OWEB then works with ODA and the partners to provide funding both for technical assistance and required monitoring. And so each of the strategic implementation areas invests in at least $25,000 of monitoring. The monitoring plan is put together by a local monitoring team, which is made up of key partners, including DEQ and ODF&W, OSU Extension, ODA, and OWEB staff. They then put together and develop a monitoring plan and submit that to a statewide monitoring advisory group who reviews it collaboratively, provides feedback, and then they end up implementing the monitoring. What we've really seen in the strategic implementation areas is they're enabling local partners to really collect some critical baseline data in areas that tend to be maybe underutilized, under-monitored. There's not a lot of baseline data, and it's helping inform their future restoration actions. We've talked a little bit about throughout the day some of the Telling the Restoration Story grants. So that's another use of the quantifying outcomes where our grantees have collected data and they have maybe files and files of data or spreadsheets and spreadsheets of data, but they really haven't had a chance to compile it, synthesize it, and figure out how to share it with the local community. We have these small Telling the Restoration Story grants where we have 11 completed grants with various products that are located on our website, grantees' website, including the story, what are they called? The story maps, that's the word. Story maps and handouts, videos. Some of the Telling the Restoration Story videos have also been used by Oregon Lottery to tell the story of the impact of the Oregon Lottery dollars. All of these grants are funded with lottery dollars and not federal funds. I'm pretty sure in the past we've had the Zoomeralt Prairie Telling the Restoration Story come to OWEB, but this is just one of the examples of $4 million in restoration investments from OWEB over time, from restoration and weed removal, the acquisition funding. And then it's really great to be able to say, with this significant investment, these are all the things that we've learned. This is the data that's been collected. This is the results of the significant investment. And the products can be used by both the local grantees, but also by joining landowners and other partners. So this is where you take a big breath and you think, wow, we're doing a lot. This is a map of all of those monitoring projects that we've just been talking about across the state. Ridgetop to ridgetop, a variety of different grantees, a variety of different project types. And what's really been fun for me, especially when we first put it together for the board committee and then putting it together again today, is to just really think about how our monitoring dollars are really supporting the goal, our end goal, which is informing future restoration and implementation. And not just from our grantees and not just for OWEB, but for our state partners, our federal partners, local communities, tribes. It's informing not only OWEB's strategic plan and OWEB's actions, but those of integrated water resources strategy, the SWAP, the intensely monitored watershed, TMDLs. It's really a collaborative effort. And if you think about, often you hear, and we saw with Stephanie's key performance measures, we report out on our restoration outcomes through the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory. We house that, we manage that, we staff that. But for the monitoring, it's different. Our grantees are feeding data into ODF&W, DEQ, water resources, and other state and federal programs that are managing this data, because those are the partners that are using the data to inform TMDLs, to inform state strategies. And we just get to be this amazing facilitator and working with our local partners to get this done on the ground and reporting it back out for statewide use. And with that, we just really want to appreciate the moment that we got to talk with the board today about monitoring. And we have a few questions here. I know we have a few minutes for discussion. I wanted to make sure we left some and be respectful of our tour partners today. But we would love to hear any questions you have on what we just went through, or if there's things that you would like to hear about in the future that we can bring back to the full board and to the committee that we could talk about.
Fantastic presentation. That is just a lot of work across the whole state, and a lot of work to put just that presentation together, but really like meaningful, impactful monitoring efforts. So great job to OWEB staff and for that presentation. So like Courtney mentioned, there's a couple questions on the board here. And then, what comments or questions do board members have for Ken and Courtney? I saw Mark. We'll go Mark, and then, what's your name? Kelly. It's at that point in the day. And then Bruce. So go ahead, Mark Labhart.
So Ken, could you go back to that one chart with the bar graph that shows the 7 million? Could you go back to that? And while you're doing that, I'm sure appreciative that we appointed Liz to chair that committee. So it's really, I'm glad that we did that. So I think it's very acceptable. So it's the one right back at the very beginning. Okay, so while you're doing that, the question that I have is, it looks like we're there, or we've got that 7 million request. How many applications is that?
It's 34.
Those 34 applications, and it looks like we fund about, on average, about 2 million. So you see where I'm going with this? We're going to have to tell a lot of people no for $2 million. And so how is the review committee going to prioritize 34 applications for $2 million when they're requesting 7 million? I mean,
I'll have Ken answer that. I will say the one thing, we try to get them to not think about the amount of money they have. We want them to think about the projects and all that, but then you all get to wrestle
You
with
get
that
to
money.
tell them no.
yeah, that's what I mean. So this is going to be huge because.
Well, we didn't anticipate the request doubling from last year. So if you can see in 23 and 24, we received $3.5 million in requests, and we funded just a little over $2 million. And you guys did increase, in this spending plan, you did increase the available funds for monitoring by $500,000. So this biennium, we have $5 million for open solicitation monitoring grants.
Okay.
So that you divide that in two, so 2.5 million each year.
Is that guaranteed or is that, no?
It's in your spending plan.
Okay, it's in the spending plan. Okay.
And
That makes me feel a little bit better.
As long as people keep playing video poker, we'll be fine.
Thank you. You know what, good, I just so much, I'm saying with Lindsay, I really appreciate these little programs that 101. I mean, because we think we know something, and then they present it, like, whoa, so, yeah, it's very, very appreciated.
Just want to note that, Dan, I do see your hand up, so we'll go Kelly and then Bruce.
Thanks. Great job. Great presentation. I was really struck by the breadth and diversity of the monitoring projects that we've funded. And a couple of things that really kind of like got my attention was the funding of the USGS stream gauges, which is something that I know comes into question depending on what year it is and the level of federal funding from USGS. And that information is so important for so many user groups, not just folks like us that are in natural resources or folks that are managing natural resources, but also guides and just communities in general for flood risk. And so that really came to my attention as something that is a really great example of how OWEB is picking things up and helping to adapt with some shortfalls from the federal funding. And I thought that was fantastic. I also appreciated the call out for, and I don't have any favorite watersheds, but I might really love the Umpqua. All right, I'm gonna put that out there. And I really appreciated the shout out to the Partnership for Umpqua Rivers. And I just wanted to mention that with that, the tribe partnered really early on when PER first started collecting the data. We were going out and helping them collect as well. And so I think some of the partnerships too with the monitoring are really key. And there's typically a lot of partnerships that come along with this monitoring throughout. And so that was great. And then also the Long Tom Watershed project is such a new, cool way to think about monitoring and incorporating traditional knowledge into the monitoring. That I'm really excited about that one, and I'd love to hear more about that once the data's collected. And I think that's one that we could highlight and is really cool and innovative and so applicable right now with trying to get fire back on the landscape and increase cultural burning to help prevent some of those catastrophic wildfires and also bring back some of our oak habitats that we've been losing so much around the state. And so I think that one is one that I'd love to hear more about in the future. I could talk monitoring all day. I also really appreciated your first slide with somebody in a wetsuit and the goggles, and you knew with how deep that water was that he was going to be doing this. The river, because I used to do that. And I really miss those days. Thank you, guys.
Okay, we'll go Bruce and then Russ.
Thanks. You know, one of the things I'm going to miss most is asking the almost too competent Ken Fetcho, almost too competent Ken Fetcho a question. And you did such a great job, both of you, that nothing really popped, and that bothered me. So I think it would be wonderful as an exercise when you have free time to look at this monitoring through the lens of our social justice, our environmental justice lens, looking at how we're applying this across, because certainly you've shown that we've got a good distribution geographically. And the last question I have for you is explain to me why Region 6 is in the middle and not to the far east, top east. Why is 5 more east than 6?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. Thanks, Bruce. So back in the day, there was only 5 regions, and Region 5 included Region 6, okay? And 4?
It was, 6 was drawn by taking some of 5 and some of 4 and creating 6.
Okay.
So
it sort of filled that gap.
No, that really doesn't answer the question. You had to rename one, you had to make one of them 6, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so why'd you make that one 6?
Well, it's not like it's not linear where it goes left to right.
yeah.
Because it was the new one, Bruce.
Yeah.
It was the new one. They all previously had a name.
Yeah.
They all previously had a name.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thanks, Gary.
Would you like to make a motion to?
It's not an action.
Almost too competent.
We'll go Russ and then Dan.
So the Gulf of Astoria, number one, alphabetical, okay. Thank you. So I'm curious what the two of you have, what your initial impressions were, and then maybe perhaps a week after it sunk in. What is the monitoring responsibilities to meet the governor's new executive order without any additional budget allocated to it?
Oh, it's funny, they just look right at me. I'm gonna ask us to not ask staff to answer that question. We have
I
not
was just
gotten
asking
that
your
level of
asking your
detail.
impression.
It hasn't even been out for a week yet. I don't see new monitoring responsibilities in that. I see an obligation to do exactly what Ken and Courtney described that we're already doing in terms of interagency coordination and strategic investment, and what Bruce described of how do we center climate resiliency and community preparedness for climate change in part of that within our existing authorities and responsibilities. Sorry, Russ.
Okay.
Dan, then Liza Jean.
Thanks, guys. Great info. Just wanted to give a shout out that that monitoring data is being transferred to DEQ for doing impaired water assessments. So kudos for that. And you brought up the Umpqua as a specific example, and I don't need an answer, but just encouraging that, you know, that happens with all the water quality data that the state tracks for impaired waters. I think you said that the grantees themselves are sort of responsible for pushing that data out, and it'd just be pretty important to make sure that the DEQ is able to leverage that data. And then I also just wanted to comment on what I think was an example of adaptive management, but would like to hear if there are others. With the effectiveness monitoring that's done, Ken, you talked about a lot of work with tide gates and coming out with a restoration bulletin. So to me, that seems like you guys learned a lot in the adaptive management model. You were rolling that out to folks to sort of adapt and do restoration based on the latest and greatest science. And I just didn't know if you had other examples of how you roll out the effectiveness monitoring that you're collecting to do adaptive management across the portfolio of grantees.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So if I understand the question correctly, you're looking for other examples of other investments in effectiveness monitoring and how that's being applied to adaptive management?
Yeah, just like, I mean, and maybe there aren't any, but are there examples where you're doing the effectiveness monitoring and it is in the framework of adaptive management? So how does that data get rolled out to actually get people to adapt?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of examples, and it just kind of depends on what the monitoring is. So, for instance, some of the work for programmatic effectiveness monitoring has been in the Middle Fork John River Intensively Monitored Watershed, or IMW, and that work has been occurring since 2008. So it's just really been an iterative process where the monitoring, they've been doing restoration, monitoring, applying that information, and continue to evolve their restoration approaches, but also adaptively manage those specific projects. We've done a lot of work to help across the Pacific Northwest with other IMWs, really trying to help export or disseminate those findings to other watersheds where there just isn't the investment in monitoring. So other folks are really learning, some of the stuff that we've been sharing from the Middle Fork is really trying to understand what that primary priority limiting factor is. So folks are really trying to address that, and before they're expecting to see, benefits to salmon populations. So that's one example. The Stage Zero work that Brian's familiar with, that OWEB has been supporting, we've had less of a hands-on role with informing the adaptive management, where the partners that we're helping support doing the restoration and monitoring, they're been more proactive in helping really push that adaptive management cycle. And so I think it's really just specific to the type of restoration we're investing in monitoring of. and depending on sort of that context and the partnerships involved and how that adaptive management is applied.
And the other thing I would add, Dan, for the first part of your question, we actually require in our grant agreements for monitoring grantees that they, with the project completion report, show us that they have either provided the data to ODF&W or to DEQ. And it's what really helps us ensure that we're following that whole loop and supporting our state partners.
Audrey, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add, so Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator for the record, and just to add to the response about monitoring in the context of adaptive management. When you think about the way progress is tracked for the focused investment partnerships, there's by design in that progress reporting, there's reporting out on adaptive management, and oftentimes that includes reference to how's the monitoring going, and how is that fitting, how are lessons being learned, and how are the partners adapting through the initiative. Thanks.
Thank you. And I see your hand up, Brian. We'll go Liza Jane, then Mark Webb. Oh, no, Liza Jane, Mark Webb, and then Jesse.
Thank you. So this may be a follow-up to what Dan was asking. So for the collaborative work I do on the Malheur, federally funded, monitoring has been a really key part. Adaptive management has been key in getting people who didn't get along or have a shared vision to coalesce around a view. And it's also changed how the Forest Service implements its projects, and we've got a sense of that. And also on the Malheur, they've just done a lot of aquatics work, and we took a field trip once where we saw the beginning of that effort where it was just log weirs and the evolution up to stage 0. And I guess what I'm asking, is there a chance that y'all can do some videos where we get a sense visually of how this is how we used to do it, this is why it didn't work, and this is why we changed, just to give us a sense of that transition over time as well as the why? I think when you talk about effectiveness monitoring, you are tracking progress, but I think it'd be nice to see the changes and why.
Thanks.
And it's
Feedback.
for us, it occurred to me, or at least this is what I think, I don't know that it's right. Adaptive management is as much or more critical for building social consensus and agreement as it is for doing good work on the land, and having that sense does seem pretty important.
Thanks, Mark. Good idea.
Jesse, and then Brian, please.
So this is in response to the question that you had on the slide about what are we not monitoring? And it's not to say that you're not, it's just a question more, which is, Clackamas just came up and had a slide that said the number of jobs that were, I think, that was created as a result of the project. And you frequently cite that University of Oregon study. Is there talk about updating that information and better tracking the number of jobs and the investments in local economies to be able to tell that part of OWEB's story as well?
Great question, Jesse. We are actually working currently on compiling the various socioeconomic studies that are out there, so we could at least share some of that information, have it in one place. The challenge is that has been funded in the past on the ops side and not on the grant side. And we don't have any extra money on that side to fund such another effort, but there is definitely interest, and it's something we keep talking about. And if there ever happens to be some extra money on that side, I'm sure it's something we would pursue in the future.
A little more video poker.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Okay, Brian?
Yeah, appreciate that. To build on Mark's comments and then Dan's as well, as far as the changing and the evolution of practice, yeah, I think that's a really important story to tell, Mark. I know that as some of the outreach, virtually every presentation that I've seen on some of the Valley Reset Stage 0 type work has told that story that you're talking about as far as the evolution of different practices over time. But I think that's a critical message that, can't be told enough, essentially. And I think it's a really good point that should be emphasized in any sorts of outreach around effectiveness of practices, how they've evolved over time. And so related to that, I think there's a really good articulation of how the data gets shared and integrated into the various databases managed by the various agencies and how they use them for TMDLs and things like that. I think that's really important, and one of the things that I was glad to hear when I was first became part of the subcommittee for the monitoring. But I guess one of my questions to build on Dan's comments on the adaptive management, and I apologize if I should already know the answer to this, but is there you obviously have a database with all these projects, you just displayed them spatially, and I'm sure that there are deliverables for each of these, including reports and findings and that kind of stuff. Is there a readily accessible database to practitioners where someone could go on and say, I'm interested in, vegetation response to this kind of treatment, and I can get a summary of the findings of the 30 projects that have been funded and their spatial distribution and such, and then also, high-level adaptive, findings and implications or adaptive management kind of implications, and then be able to use that to obviously dig into the technical reports, which are more in detail, but to get those summary level queries that are readily accessible to practitioners. So
it's called Ken's brain.
The answer is no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We got to call Ken, 1-800-KEN Fetcho.
Yep. So we have an online grant management database, which is where we can pull the project information from: grant number, grant name, location, funding amount. And then we have not easily, and then summaries of projects. So, grantees can go in and say, I want to do this type of monitoring project, and find other examples and dig down and find project completion reports. But the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory enables people to query and get actual outputs of stream miles and riparian and things like that. We don't have that for our other grant types. It takes more human energy and time to get at that level of information. So it really, though, is because Ken reads every report and dives in and is so detailed in his work. It is in Ken's brain. So it is 1-800-CALL-KEN. For now.
Yeah, right now, Brian, you can, using Augmus, you can find narrative summaries for each monitoring grant at the individual level. But in order to, say, compile findings across, like you mentioned, vegetation response to restoration, we would have to do that physically, each going through each grant, and then summarizing those findings to compile that.
Yeah. Okay. Appreciate that. Just one last comment. I think there's, monitoring provides a great opportunity to kind of assess and share successes, but also failures. And I think the failures piece is a real opportunity for learning. I think a lot of people know that, and good practitioners and agencies embrace that kind of failure piece as being a key part of learning. The other thing, though, that we could fail, not just on the projects, but we can have failed monitoring strategies. So in other words, the way we tried to monitor this project was not suitable to the questions we were looking to answer. And that's actually a good thing to learn about, too, is not just successful monitoring strategies to answer the questions, but also ones that didn't work so that we don't repeat those. So that's another kind of opportunity to kind of think about.
Yeah, so we did do that. So we were fortunate enough that Professor Peg Boulay from the University of Oregon did her sabbatical with us in 2020, 2021. And one of the projects that she produced while she was doing her sabbatical with us was looked at assessments of different regional monitoring frameworks and what was successful and what were failures. And we integrated both of those two sets of information into our monitoring guidance document that we developed for restoration initiatives. So I believe that we have done that, and that was a look at they did a variety of different regional monitoring frameworks in the Pacific Northwest, some in Oregon, some in Washington. And so we took that information and applied that in a guidance document. So I believe that we have that information, what works, what doesn't work. And really the idea is sharing those lessons learned, because you'd be surprised how many folks doing monitoring still repeat these common pitfalls. And they're really,
I'm not surprised by that, actually. Yeah,
yeah.
that's why I was asking the question.
So we really did try to take that to heart. And working with Bonneville Environmental Foundation, we have a monitoring guidance document that has really tried to distill that down so the folks can, when they're developing monitoring plans, try to avoid those common pitfalls.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
So Russ has a brief comment, and then I'm going to move us through the rest of today's agenda.
So as it relates to the jobs information, I was reminded, Brian, that the original CLFRP program, both the BLM and the Forest Service helped to finance the economic study done in Oregon. That was done with OFRI and the Nature Conservancy. And if it hasn't been updated, maybe there's a way to build a new collaboration to get that updated.
Thank you. Okay, so before we adjourn, thank you so much for a very robust conversation about Monitoring 101 and the great information. So really appreciate the time and the presentation.